On the morning of November 2009, a British cavalry sniper fired a bullet that took more than 6 seconds to reach its target, dropped nearly 400 feet during flight, and traveled a distance 1,000 yards beyond the maximum effective range of the weapon he was holding. The round struck a Taliban machine gunner in the stomach from 2,475 meters away. Before that first bullet arrived, the sniper had already fired his second shot. When an American special operations sniper who had operated in the same province later learned what had happened that day, he wrote that it was an amazing shot that any sniper would be proud of. Craig Harrison, the British soldier who fired it, when asked years afterward whether he felt proud of the achievement, said, "No, not at all." The Ministry of Defense, upon learning that their cavalryman had set the world record for the longest confirmed kill in combat, published his identity, made him a target for Al-Qaeda kidnapping, paid him £100,000 in compensation for the security breach, and medically discharged him with post-traumatic stress disorder after 22 years of service. Tell me in the comments, have you ever heard of Corporal of Horse Craig Harrison before today? Because what you are about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew about how nations treat the soldiers who break records to save their comrades' lives. Now let's go. To understand how a British cavalry regiment sniper ended up taking an impossible shot that would earn recognition from American Special Operations Forces half a world away, you must first understand what Helmand Province actually was in the autumn of that year, and why soldiers from 2 Allied armies were dying there at rates that made it the deadliest battlefield of the entire Afghan war. The surface version is straightforward enough. Following the September 11th attacks, coalition forces deployed to Afghanistan to destroy Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. By 2006, British forces had assumed responsibility for Helmand in southern Afghanistan as part of NATO's expansion of the International Security Assistance Force mission. The deployment began with catastrophically optimistic predictions. British soldiers, one government minister promised, would leave Afghanistan in 3 years without firing a shot. Within weeks, paratroopers were fighting sustained battles for district centers across the province, burning through ammunition at rates that shocked commanders, and discovering that what they had been sent to stabilize was not a failing insurgency that needed one more push, but a fully reconstituted enemy operating from sanctuary in Pakistan, using terrain they had defended against foreign armies across multiple centuries. By the time Harrison deployed, Helmand had become something closer to a conventional battlefield, fought by unconventional means. The Taliban controlled most of the rural areas. They moved in company-sized formations. They prepared defensive positions, registered mortars on likely helicopter landing zones, and conducted tactical planning that demonstrated professional military competence, rather than the improvised resistance coalition intelligence had predicted. British casualties mounted. Between 2006 and 2009, more than 100 British soldiers died in the province, representing roughly 1/3 of all United Kingdom casualties suffered in Afghanistan since 2001. The Americans were faring no better. United States Marines who deployed to replace British forces in some areas, particularly around the town of Sangin, suffered catastrophic losses within days of arrival. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, lost 9 Marines, killed in action within a week of beginning operations. The scout snipers of their surveillance and target acquisition platoon were surrounded and taking effective fire from 180 degrees of enemy positions within 4 hours of their first patrol. 2 primary threats defined the tactical environment. Improvised explosive devices made road travel a calculated risk, where every culvert could hide enough explosive to vaporize an armored vehicle. The IED threat was so severe that British forces increasingly operated from vehicle-mounted positions rather than dismounted patrols, accepting reduced tactical flexibility in exchange for the armor protection that represented the difference between catastrophic casualties and survivable injuries when a bomb detonated. The second threat was direct fire from prepared positions. Taliban fighters with PKM belt-fed machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades occupied compounds, tree lines, and high ground that commanded fields of fire over the approaches coalition forces had to use. They were patient. They waited for patrols to enter kill zones, areas of open ground where cover was minimal and escape routes were blocked. And then they opened fire from multiple directions simultaneously. In this environment, snipers made the difference between a patrol pinned down and a patrol that could maneuver because someone was putting precision rounds onto the enemy positions that mattered most. Musa Kala, where the record-breaking shot would occur, sat in the northern reaches of the province at an elevation of 1,043 meters above sea level. The town had been the site of a prolonged siege in 2006, where British forces had defended a district center compound for 56 days against daily Taliban attacks before negotiating a withdrawal that the Americans viewed as a strategic surrender. In 2007, a combined British and American force of more than 2,000 troops had recaptured the town after 3 days of fighting. By November of that year, the Taliban maintained a presence in the areas surrounding Musa Kala, using the terrain south of the town to position fighting teams that could interdict coalition patrols moving through the valley. The elevation mattered. At 1,043 meters above sea level, the air density was significantly lower than at sea level, which affected how bullets flew, how far they remained supersonic, and what distances could be achieved by a sniper who understood how to exploit the conditions. The rifle that would set the world record was British, designed by a company founded by a 2-time Olympic shooting gold medalist, manufactured in Portsmouth, and fielded for the first time by 16th Air Assault Brigade in 2008. The L115A3 long-range rifle was chambered in .338, Lapua Magnum, an 8.59mm cartridge that the United States Army had commissioned Finnish manufacturer Lapua to develop in the 1980s and then declined to adopt, choosing instead to retain their existing inventory of .308 Winchester and .300 Winchester Magnum rifles. The British took what the Americans had passed over and built their sniper program around it. The Lapua round was 60% longer than the American .308, carried significantly more kinetic energy at extended range, and hit, according to those who had fired both, like a .44 Magnum. Where American M24 and M40 sniper rifles had effective ranges measured in hundreds of meters, the L115A3 was rated for engagements beyond 1,100 meters under optimal conditions. Weighing 6.8 kilograms, it fired a 250-grain bullet at a muzzle velocity of 936 meters per second, and was topped with a Schmidt & Bender 5 to 25 times 56 millimeter scope that allowed the shooter to identify targets at distances where insurgents appeared as dark shapes against lighter backgrounds rather than as clearly defined human forms. The man who would push that rifle beyond every limit its designers had imagined was not special operations, not SAS, not a specially selected member of an elite unit whose name appears in redacted documents and classified after-action reports. Craig Harrison was a cavalryman from Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, who had joined the Household Cavalry at 16 because his parents, both dog handlers in the Royal Air Force Police, had separated when he was young, and the Army represented a structure and a purpose that his fractured family had not provided. Born in November of 1974, the younger of two boys, he enlisted in 1990 and was assigned to the Blues and Royals, one of the two regiments that comprise the Household Cavalry, the formation that guards the monarch during ceremonial occasions and deploys operationally when the nation goes to war. His early service took him to Bosnia during the fragile aftermath of the Balkan conflicts, where he learned that peacekeeping was a term that described the mission but not the reality, and that soldiers deployed to separate warring factions often found themselves in firefights with people who had not agreed to stop fighting. His first experience with a sniper rifle came not in Britain, but on a firing range near a British military base in Split, Croatia. The weapon was a Dragunov SVD, a Russian-designed semi-automatic rifle that one of the local forces had brought to the range. Harrison, curious, and never one to decline an opportunity to fire something new, took the rifle, aimed at a tree, and squeezed the trigger. In his memoir, written years later when he could speak without institutional consequences, he described the rifle as looking like an elongated AK-47 and noted that after firing at the tree, he observed that it practically split the tree in half. The experience planted something. Not an obsession, but an understanding that precision fire at distance represented a capability that ordinary riflemen did not possess, and that the capability might be worth pursuing. He deployed to Iraq twice, first in the initial invasion phase, and again during the brutal urban fighting that characterized the occupation. After his first Iraq tour, he trained formally as a sniper, transitioning from the cavalry's traditional mounted reconnaissance role into the specialized world of long-range precision fire. Sniper selection is not a course that most soldiers pass. The attrition rate is severe. Training demands a combination of patience, mathematical aptitude, physical endurance, and the particular psychological quality that allows a human being to observe another human being through a magnified optic for hours or days, learn the rhythms of their movement and the patterns of their behavior, and then kill them with a single shot from a distance at which the target never knows the shooter exists. He qualified. Returning to the Blues and Royals as a trained sniper, he deployed to Afghanistan for his first tour, then came back for a second in the autumn that would make him famous. His call sign was Maverick 41. The Blues and Royals operated in the province as part of the broader British task force, conducting mounted reconnaissance patrols in CVRT, armored vehicles, and providing sniper overwatch for operations where British infantry needed precision fire support. It was precisely because the Household Cavalry were cavalry, accustomed to mobility and reconnaissance rather than static defensive positions, that their snipers often operated from vehicle-mounted positions rather than the prepared hides that American sniper doctrine preferred. The IED threat made dismounted operations prohibitively dangerous in many areas. A sniper on foot, moving to a hide site, crossing open ground, was vulnerable to the same pressure plate bombs that destroyed armored vehicles. A sniper operating from a vehicle position, standing in a hatch or using the vehicle's armor as a platform, sacrificed some of the concealment and stability that a prepared hide offered, but gained the mobility to reposition quickly and the protection that several tons of armor provided against anything short of a direct RPG strike or a catastrophic IED detonation. He arrived carrying a rifle that had been in British service for less than 2 years, operating in an environment where the distances between British positions and Taliban firing points were often measured in kilometers rather than hundreds of meters, and about to encounter a tactical situation that would require him to attempt what every specification, every manual, and every instructor had told him should not be possible. 34 years old, married to a woman named Tanya, father to a daughter, with nearly 20 years in uniform, he was not a man seeking records or recognition. He was a professional soldier, doing the work that professional soldiers do when their nation sends them to the worst places on earth and expects them to come home alive. The morning began unremarkably. A British patrol moved south of Musa Qala, through the valley terrain that characterized northern Helmand, where green zones of vegetation along the river gave way to open desert and bare hillsides that offered excellent fields of observation for anyone occupying the high ground. The patrol was mounted, vehicles spaced at intervals that balanced security against the risk of multiple vehicles being caught in a single ambush. Harrison was in his usual position, vehicle mounted, rifle ready, scanning the terrain for threats that might not be visible to the vehicle commanders focused on navigation and immediate security. The Taliban had been active in the area for weeks. Intelligence reports indicated that fighting teams were moving through the district, preparing positions, and waiting for opportunities to engage coalition forces at times and places of their choosing. Contact began with the sound that every soldier in Afghanistan learned to recognize immediately: the distinct hammering report of a PKM machine gun, a belt-fed weapon that fired 7.62 millimeter rounds at a rate of 650 rounds per minute, and could sustain that rate long enough to pin down an entire patrol if the gunner had sufficient ammunition and a position that offered protection from return fire. The patrol was in a kill zone, an area of terrain where the Taliban had prepared their positions with care, where every approach was covered by overlapping fields of fire, where the options available were limited to bad choices and worse ones. The soldiers could not advance across open ground while taking accurate machine gun fire. They could not retreat without turning their backs to an enemy who would use that moment of vulnerability to increase the volume of fire. They could not call in air support fast enough to suppress the position before men started dying in the open. Harrison looked through his scope. The distance was extraordinary, even at first estimate. The Taliban position was not hundreds of meters away, but thousands. He could see movement, shapes that might be human forms, or might be shadows cast by structures in the midday sun. And then he saw it clearly. A flicker in the distance, an antenna, someone with a radio, coordinating the attack, and the flicker was the antenna moving as the man adjusted his position. He shifted his point of aim slightly and saw them. Two men with a PKM belt-fed Russian machine gun, and they were hammering down on the lads, his phrase for the British soldiers in the patrol who were pinned and taking fire and dying if someone did not do something immediately. He assessed the tactical mathematics that every sniper does when the alternative to attempting an impossible shot is watching comrades die. The target was approximately 2,475 meters away. His rifle was rated for 1,500 meters maximum effective range under ideal conditions. The target was therefore nearly 1,000 meters beyond the distance the rifle had been designed to engage. At that range, the bullet would be subsonic for a significant portion of its flight. It would have dropped more than 100 meters from the line of bore by the time it reached the target area. The scope's elevation adjustments, even with the canted mount that Accuracy International provided for extreme range work, could not dial in enough correction to compensate for that much drop. He would have to use the reticle's holdover hash marks, aiming far above the target and trusting that the bullet's trajectory would intersect with the target's position after the round had covered a distance longer than 25 football pitches placed end to end. The conditions were perfect. There was no wind. The visibility was clear. The weather was mild, the kind of conditions that occur perhaps a handful of times during a deployment, where every variable that normally complicates long-range shooting has aligned in the shooter's favor. He looked at his spotter and made the decision. They would attempt to range the target, to find through repeated shots and observation where the bullets were landing, and then to adjust until they found a solution that worked. This was not sniping as it appears in films, where a single perfect shot from a prepared hide eliminates a target who never sees it coming. This was bracketing, the methodical process of firing, observing the impact, adjusting the point of aim, and firing again until the relationship between where the rifle was pointed and where the bullet actually landed became predictable enough to engage the target with confidence. The first shot landed short. The spotter, watching through high magnification optics that allowed him to observe the impact area even at extreme range, called the miss and estimated the correction needed. Harrison adjusted, using the hash marks in his reticle to add elevation, and fired again. Short, but closer. The patrol was still taking fire. The machine gun had not stopped. The Taliban fighters had either not noticed the incoming rounds or had decided that a sniper at this distance represented less of an immediate threat then breaking contact and abandoning a position that was producing results. A third shot. Closer still. The process continued, round after round, each adjustment bringing the impact point nearer to the target, each shot representing one more cartridge expended from a finite supply and one more second that the patrol remained pinned. He was not calculating trajectories with ballistic charts and environmental data input into a computer. He was watching dirt kick up in relation to where the targets were positioned, adding elevation when the rounds landed short, holding when they landed close, and building toward a firing solution one bullet at a time, while the machine gun continued to hammer his comrades below. On the ninth shot, the impact was close enough. Very close. Close enough that he understood where to hold, how much elevation to add beyond what the scope could provide, and where in his reticle to place the target to compensate for a bullet drop that would measure, when the calculations were done later, by people with computers and ballistic software, 120.95 meters over the distance the round would travel. He settled behind the rifle. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate, and reducing the small movements that even a trained shooter's body makes when adrenaline and urgency are fighting discipline for dominance. He found his natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body is stillest. He placed the reticle where the 9 previous shots had taught him it needed to be. He pressed the trigger. The bullet left the muzzle at 936 meters per second, more than 3 times the speed of sound, carrying kinetic energy that would have been devastating at the ranges for which the rifle was designed. It began immediately to decelerate as atmospheric drag fought against velocity. At 1,548 meters, the distance at which the bullet would go subsonic at Musa Khala's elevation, the round was still traveling faster than sound, but slowing. Beyond that point, the bullet's velocity dropped below the speed of sound, and the trajectory became less predictable, more susceptible to minor variations in air density and temperature that would not have mattered at shorter ranges. The round flew for more than 6 seconds, covering 2,475 meters while dropping 120 meters from the line of sight, and struck the first Taliban fighter in the stomach. His spotter, watching through his optic, saw the impact. Dust disturbance at the target location. The first fighter went down immediately, struck with enough force that there was no ambiguity about whether the shot had been effective. He went straight down and did not move. The second insurgent, seeing his companion fall, grabbed the machine gun and turned toward the position, either to continue firing or to move the weapon to a location where it could still be used. Harrison had already fired his second shot before the first bullet had arrived. The flight time was 6 seconds. He had used that window to acquire the second target, apply the same hold he had just confirmed with the first shot, and send another round downrange. The second fighter was turning when the second bullet struck him through the side. He went down. Both were dead. A third shot followed, not at a human target but at the machine gun itself. The round struck the weapon, disabling it, ensuring that even if other Taliban fighters were nearby and attempted to continue the engagement, the crew-served weapon that had pinned the patrol was no longer functional. The fire on the British patrol ceased. The immediate threat was eliminated. The soldiers who had been trapped in the kill zone were no longer taking incoming rounds. Harrison did not know, in that moment, that he had just set the world record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in combat. He knew that the machine gun was silent and his comrades were alive, and the mission he had been sent to accomplish, protecting British soldiers from threats they could not address themselves, had been achieved. Later that same day, an Apache helicopter crew, curious about the engagement and skeptical that any shot could have been fired from the distance the ground team was claiming, hovered over the firing position and used the aircraft's laser rangefinder to measure the distance to the point where the Taliban machine gunners had fallen. The measurement was 2,475 meters. The coordinates were recorded by GPS. The verification was unambiguous. The previous world record for a confirmed sniper kill in combat had been set by a Canadian sniper named Rob Furlong in March of 2002 during operations in Afghanistan. Furlong's shot had been 2,430 meters. Harrison had exceeded it by 45 meters. The bodies of the two Taliban fighters were later found by Afghan National Police, who had been sent to recover the weapon. The machine gun had already been removed by other insurgents, who understood that leaving a functional PKM in coalition hands represented both a tactical loss and an intelligence opportunity they could not afford. Asked years later, after he had left the army and could speak without the constraints that active service imposes, whether he felt proud of setting the record for the longest confirmed kill in combat, Craig Harrison said, "No, not at all." The answer was not modesty, and it was not false humility. It was the response of a man who understood what the act of killing at distance actually meant, what it cost psychologically, and what it revealed about the nature of the work that snipers do. In interviews given long after the events, he described the reality that people who have not been snipers often do not understand. Anyone who says they don't feel anything for the people they've killed are not telling the truth, he said. The scope makes it intimate. You see them spit on the floor. You see them talking. You own their life, basically. You're their god for that split second, and then you take them out. The psychological burden is different from the experience of infantry soldiers who engage targets at ranges where the enemy is a shape, a muzzle flash, a source of incoming fire rather than an individual whose face and movements and habits have been observed through magnified optics for seconds or minutes or hours before the decision is made to pull the trigger. Snipers see their targets as people before they kill them. The distance that provides safety also provides detail, and the detail stays. The tour continued. Weeks after the record-breaking shot, a Taliban bullet struck his helmet. The round did not penetrate. It deflected, glancing off at an angle that represented the difference between a near miss and a catastrophic head wound, the kind of incident that soldiers describe later with dark humor, because the alternative is dwelling on how close they came to dying from a trajectory adjustment measured in millimeters. Later in the same tour, his vehicle struck an improvised explosive device buried beneath a road surface south of Musa Qala. The blast was severe enough to break both of his arms. The injuries were not immediately life-threatening, but they were career-ending for a man whose specialty required the fine motor control and physical stability that sniper work demands. He survived. He returned to the United Kingdom. He carried with him the record, the injuries, and the images that would not leave. His superiors at the Ministry of Defense, upon learning that their cavalry sniper had exceeded the previous world record by 45 meters, with a shot that had been verified by GPS and confirmed by Apache helicopter laser rangefinder, made a decision about publicity that would honor the achievement and endanger the man who had accomplished it. The record was extraordinary. The conditions under which it had been achieved, saving a trapped patrol from a machine gun position at a distance that should not have been possible, made it a story that reflected well on British military capability and the soldiers who deployed to the worst environments and succeeded anyway. The decision was made to publish the details almost immediately after his return in 2010. He was granted permission to give interviews to the BBC and to newspapers. The record was certified by Guinness World Records. The achievement received the recognition it deserved. The ministry also revealed his identity, his name, his photograph, his unit, the details that allowed anyone monitoring British military news to identify exactly who had fired the shot and where he could be found. Al-Qaeda and Taliban forces monitor coalition military press releases and news coverage for precisely this kind of information. Snipers are high-value targets. A sniper who has killed dozens of insurgents over multiple deployments, whose record-breaking shot has been publicized internationally, represents both a tactical threat to be eliminated and a propaganda opportunity if he can be captured or killed. The threats began almost immediately. Not vague warnings, but specific threats against Harrison and his family. The kind of detailed information that indicated the people making the threats had done their research and knew where to find him. The response was to place him on permanent sick leave. The decision was presented as protective, a measure to keep him out of deployment rotation and reduce his visibility, while the threat environment was assessed. The practical effect was to remove him from the career he had built over 2 decades, isolate him from the regiment and the structure that had defined his adult life, and place him in a holding pattern where he was technically still in service, but functionally separated from the work and the community that had sustained him. What had begun as acute stress from combat exposure deepened into post-traumatic stress disorder, exacerbated by isolation, threats, and the psychological aftermath of years of deployments. In 2014, after 22 years of service, he was medically discharged. The compensation paid was £100,000 for revealing his identity and creating the security breach that had put him and his family at risk of Al-Qaeda kidnapping or assassination. The payment was an acknowledgement of institutional failure, a recognition that the decision to publicize his name had been, at minimum, a serious error in judgment, and possibly a violation of the duty of care that the military owes to soldiers whose work makes them targets. His assessment of what had happened was more direct. In interviews given after his discharge, when institutional consequences no longer constrained what he could say, he described his experience with the clarity that comes from having had time to process both the achievement and the aftermath. "I joined when I was 16, he said, "and since all of this has happened, I felt abandoned, absolutely abandoned by my regiment. I spent 22 years loyal to that regiment, putting my life on the line doing tours, and they just hung me out to dry. My trust in people, the armed forces, it's gone. The sniper community, both British and American, operates by metrics that differ from the institutional measures of success and failure that governments apply to military operations. Snipers assess achievements not by the publicity they generate or the awards they produce, but by the variables that had to align for a shot to succeed, the skill required to exploit those variables, and whether the shooter survived to apply the lessons learned in future engagements. By those standards, the engagement south of Musa Qala represented an achievement that redefined what the professional sniper community understood to be possible under combat conditions. The British sniper community recognized it immediately. The technical challenges involved in bracketing a target at extreme range, using reticle holdover to compensate for elevation that the scope could not provide, accounting for a bullet drop that exceeded 120 meters, and successfully engaging 2 separate targets in rapid succession, all while the targets were actively engaged in combat operations, demonstrated a level of skill and nerve that occurred rarely enough to be noteworthy. The American sniper community took note as well. Nicholas Irving, a former sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment's 3rd Ranger Battalion, who had deployed to Afghanistan as a special operations sniper and earned the nickname the Reaper for achieving 33 confirmed kills during a single deployment, operated in the province during the same general period. He was the first African American to serve as a sniper in his battalion. He deployed 6 times to Iraq and Afghanistan with the Rangers, serving in roles that progressed from assaulter to machine gunner to designated marksman, and finally to sniper team leader. His combat experience gave him first-hand knowledge of the terrain, the threat environment, and the distances at which engagements occurred in a province where Taliban fighters used the geography to their advantage and coalition forces adapted their tactics to survive. After leaving military service, he became a New York Times best-selling author, writing memoirs that detailed his experiences as a sniper and the psychological realities of killing at distance. When Harrison published his memoir, The Longest Kill, The Story of Maverick, 4-1 in 2015. Irving wrote an endorsement that carried weight not because it was effusive praise, which it was not, but because it came from a peer whose credibility within the special operations sniper community was unquestioned. For any sniper, Irving wrote, being able to place a projectile on a target at distance in combat can be a challenging task. For fellow sniper Craig Harrison, he truly went above and beyond and took the sniper's craft to a whole new high, placing a round on his targets at a distance exceeding 1.5 miles while operating in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, a place I know all too well. It was an amazing shot that any sniper would be proud of. The endorsement represented professional recognition from one craftsman to another, an acknowledgement that the shot had expanded what the community understood to be achievable, and that the soldier who had fired it deserved the respect that achievement commanded. Irving knew the distances, he knew the conditions, he knew what a 1.5 mile shot required in terms of preparation, environmental assessment, ballistic calculation, and the particular quality of nerve that allows a sniper to attempt what doctrine says should not be possible, because the alternative is watching men die. Harrison left the British Army with a world record that would stand for several more years. The injuries from the IED blast, Al-Qaeda death threats, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, compensation for a security breach that should never have occurred, and the conviction that the institution he had served since he was 16 years old had failed him when he needed support most. The medical discharge ended a career that had spanned from his enlistment as a 16-year-old seeking structure and purpose through deployments to Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, through the transition from cavalry trooper to trained sniper, through the record-breaking shot and the injuries that followed. He experienced constant flashbacks. He relied on heavy medication to manage symptoms that included severe sleep disruption and intrusive memories. He gave interviews to the BBC and other media outlets in which he turned his back to the camera, maintaining his privacy and protecting what remained of his anonymity, even as he spoke about experiences that he needed to articulate. His marriage to Tanya endured the strain that trauma and the threat environment placed on family life. His daughter grew up with a father whose service had made him a target and whose psychological injuries were not visible, but were nonetheless real and persistent. He wrote his memoir, which was published and became a Sunday Times bestseller. The book was described by reviewers and readers as brutal and uncompromising, an honest account that did not romanticize the experience of being a sniper or shy away from the psychological costs that the work imposed. Martin Bell, the war correspondent and former member of Parliament, who had covered more conflicts than most generals had commanded, described the book as the Rourke's drift of our times, comparing the defense of the patrol under impossible odds to the 1879 battle in which a small British garrison held a position against overwhelming Zulu forces. After leaving the army, he worked with Accuracy International, the company that had manufactured the rifle he used to set the record. He designed equipment based on his experiences, including a sniper drag bag and a rucksack system that addressed the practical problems he had encountered during deployments. The work represented a continuation of his expertise, applied to a different purpose, taking the lessons learned in combat and translating them into equipment improvements that would benefit the soldiers who came after him. He founded Maverick Survival School, a registered charity that provides bushcraft training and nature-based therapeutic programs to support mental health recovery, particularly for veterans and others affected by trauma. The organization uses the call sign he carried as its name, and the programs it offers are designed around the understanding that outdoor skills, time in natural environments, away from the stimuli that trigger symptoms, and the community that forms among people who have experienced similar trauma can provide recovery pathways that medication and traditional therapy alone cannot. His current work is saving people, not with precision rifle fire, but with teaching skills that keep men and women functioning when the psychological aftermath of war has made normal civilian life difficult or impossible. The methods have changed. The mission, fundamentally, has not. The soldier who fired the longest confirmed kill shot in British military history now teaches veterans how to build fires, navigate by stars, and find stability in the natural world. When the medication and the flashbacks and the sounds that will not leave make the modern world unbearable. Maverick Survival School represents his answer to the question of what comes after service, what a man does when the institution that defined his life has discharged him, and the skills that made him valuable in war do not translate directly to civilian employment, but can be adapted to help others who are fighting the same battles he fought when he came home. In June of 2017, a Canadian Special Operations sniper operating in Iraq against Islamic State fighters fired a shot that traveled 3,540 meters and killed a target at a distance that exceeded the record by more than 1,000 meters. The Canadian shot was confirmed, verified, and recognized as the new world record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in combat. The achievement was extraordinary, made possible by technological improvements in ammunition and optics, by extreme elevation advantage from a high-rise position, and by the skill of a shooter operating at the highest levels of the special operations community. Records fall. That is what records do. The shot remains the longest confirmed kill by a British sniper. It remains in the top 5 longest confirmed kills in military history. The circumstances under which it was achieved, vehicle mounted rather than from a prepared hide, standing position rather than prone, equipment from an earlier generation rather than the improved systems available years later, make direct comparisons difficult and somewhat beside the point. What matters is not whether one shot was longer than another, but what each shot demonstrated about capability and what each meant to the soldiers whose lives depended on the outcome. Tell me again, before today, had you ever heard the name Craig Harrison? Had you known that a British cavalry sniper set a world record for the longest confirmed combat kill, saved his patrol from a Taliban machine gun position at a distance longer than 25 football pitches, and was subsequently medically discharged with post-traumatic stress disorder after his own Ministry of Defense revealed his identity and made him a target for Al-Qaeda kidnapping? Because the distance between what he achieved and how he was treated afterward is the distance in which every modern war's real story is written. The rifle that set the record remains in service with the British Army. The soldier who fired it was discharged. The achievement is taught in training courses for snipers in multiple nations' militaries. The man who achieved it now teaches veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder how to survive the peace after they have survived the war. Nicholas Irving, the American Special Operations sniper who operated in the same province and understood exactly what the shot required, called it an amazing shot that any sniper would be proud of. Craig Harrison, when asked the same question years later, said, "No, not at all. If you believe the full story deserves to be remembered, leave a comment below. And if you want to understand what the longest wars cost the soldiers who fought them, you now know where to begin."